Look at this small glass shaker sitting on your kitchen table. Today, salt is so cheap and abundant that restaurants give it away for free. We scrape it off our windshields in the winter, and we actively try to scrub it from our diets to lower our blood pressure. But for thousands of years, this simple white crystal was white gold. The biological reality is that human beings cannot survive without sodium. It is the chemical that allows our neurons to fire, our muscles to contract, and our blood to pump. We have a primal, psychological drive to consume it. And because it was an absolute biological necessity that was incredibly difficult to extract from the earth, salt became the ultimate lever of power. Empires weren't just built on land or gold. They were built by controlling the mineral that kept human bodies functioning. To understand the power of salt, you have to look at humanity's first major productivity bottleneck, food rot. Before refrigeration, a society's productivity was strictly limited by the decay of its harvest. You could hunt a massive animal or catch a net full of fish, but you couldn't store it. Salt changed the psychological and biological constraints of human planning. By pulling moisture out of meat and fish through osmosis, salt halted bacterial growth, meaning food could be preserved for months or even years. This single chemical reaction freed humanity from the daily panic of starvation. It allowed for long-term planning, the division of labor, and the provisioning of massive armies. Salt was humanity's first great agricultural productivity hack, and the empires that mastered it conquered the world. In ancient Rome, the entire military machine ran on salt. The Via Salaria, or Salt Road, was built specifically to transport salt from the coastal pans of Ostia to the capital. Roman soldiers were often paid their wages with a salt allowance. The Latin word for this allowance was salarium, which is the root of the modern English word salary. When you say someone is worth their salt, you are referencing a time when this mineral was literally the currency of human labor. The Romans recognized that a legionnaire without salt would succumb to muscle cramps and neurological fatigue within days. By controlling the salt supply, Rome ensured its troops remained hyper-productive and physically dominant, while simultaneously subjugating any tribe whose salt lines they cut off. History progressed. Salt became the cornerstone of immense wealth. The majestic city of Venice, with its grand canals and Renaissance art, was not built entirely on the spice trade. Long before they traded pepper and silk, Venetian merchants built a ruthless monopoly on the salt pans of the Adriatic Sea. They artificially restricted the supply to drive up prices, enforcing their contracts with a massive naval fleet. But the monopolization of salt also had a dark psychological consequence. When governments realized they could tax a biological necessity, they created deep, generational resentment. Where was this more devastating than in France? For centuries, the French crown enforced a deeply oppressive salt tax, known as the gabelle. By law, every citizen over the age of 8 was required to buy a minimum amount of salt every year at highly inflated government-fixed prices. From a psychological perspective, the gabelle was uniquely cruel. It held a population's biological health hostage to fund the king's wars. The tax inspectors, known as the gabelous, had the authority to search homes and execute smugglers. The simmering rage caused by this tax became one of the primary psychological triggers that sparked the French Revolution. When the peasants stormed the Bastille, they weren't just looking for gunpowder. They were demanding the abolition of the salt tax. If you are fascinated by how simple things shape human psychology, hit subscribe, because the most masterful use of salt in human history happened in the 20th century. By 1930, the British Empire held a strict monopoly on salt production in colonial India. Indians were forbidden from collecting or selling salt themselves, forced instead to buy heavily taxed British salt. Mahatma Gandhi understood the profound emotional and psychological weight of this. He knew that salt was a unifying symbol, a basic requirement of life that affected the poorest farmer and the wealthiest merchant alike. In a masterclass of political productivity, Gandhi organized a 240-mile march to the Arabian Sea. When he arrived, he simply reached down and picked up a handful of salt-rich mud, boiling it to extract the crystal. It was a completely nonviolent act, but by illegally producing a biological necessity, he broke the psychological spell of British authority. The Salt March ignited a mass civil disobedience movement that fundamentally fractured the British. Today, salt has lost its imperial aura. Industrial mining and modern evaporation techniques have made it universally accessible. In the 1920s, public health officials made the brilliant decision to add iodine to table salt, hijacking our biological craving for sodium to secretly eradicate goiter and prevent cognitive developmental issues globally. Yet,
The legacy of salt is written into the very fabric of our society. It is in the salary you earn, the preserved foods in your pantry, and the borders of the nations you live in. The next time you carelessly shake salt over your dinner, remember what you are holding. It is the mineral that prevented starvation, fueled legions, sparked revolutions, and toppled empires.